Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Project Fairlady. So, today's project for the Z32, I'm going to rebuild the power steering rack. And I'm armed with a bag of goodies that I picked from a parts diagram on the breakdown of the rack. I've no idea whether I've got everything that I need. It's all just stuff that I picked out from Nissan. I think I have everything, but I guess we're going to see. So hopefully I'll have everything. I won't get stuck. If I do, I'll just have to shut the video and continue on at another time. So I think I have all the bits necessary to rebuild it. I have all the relevant stuff from the factory service manual, which I honestly find quite useless a lot of the time. Basically, all I'm going to do is just go off this layout here. It sort of shows me how it goes together, and I can kind of see by looking at this what the order of disassembly will be, even though I can use the cheat sheet and kind of have a bit of a look. It's funny, you know, like I find stuff like this very hard to follow. I don't know whether it's just me. Maybe it is just me, maybe I'm just an idiot, but, you know, as you guys that know, I'm pretty capable with most things, but I usually just use my own wits. I usually just kind of go, well, this is what I reckon, and I just kind of get stuck in, and usually I go with my gut and I'm pretty right. Often I find if I obsess over instruction manuals like this on how to disassemble things, it ends up just confusing me, and that's when I will tend to bugger things up. Yeah, which is part of the reason why I do this stuff, guys. Like, I find it much easier to watch someone do it and then copy what's been done rather than, you know, read some friggin' parts breakdown or some shit instructions in a service manual. Just purely because the amount of pictorial explanation with a few words is generally very, very lacking, and it can often put you in a situation where you end up compromising stuff. So, as I say, I just have a bit of a general look and just go, oh yeah, are there any important things that I may have missed? Drilling out this stake mark in this end of the shaft is probably the only thing that may have caused a bit of a hiccup. Other than that, rack and pinion, it's all pretty basic. I have done this kind of stuff before, not this rack before. So I am attacking it as a first timer doing one of these. So hopefully I'll be able to give you guys some sort of relevant material that you can refer back to if you're doing a similar kind of thing. Now, there's nothing actually wrong with this rack. Just as part of the rebuild process on the Z32, I am rebuilding all of the components on the car. This is just another one. Obviously, this thing, I think it had a few oil leaks. It was very hard to tell because basically everything in the car leaked oil. So realistically, it's just part of the process to replace oil seals and things like that in every component as you go through a full rebuild on a car. Obviously, this thing's been cleaned quite a few times. This was very, very grubby when it came out of the car. It's probably been cleaned 3 or 4 times. The initial cleaning just to get all the thick gunk off it when it was removed from the car, and every time it's been handled, basically it's been cleaned. And I've just, even though I had this sitting on the shelf, all oiled up and wrapped up in plastic to keep it all nice and good, I've unwrapped it, wiped it all off, and then gone over it again with a couple of wire brushes and got heaps more crud off it. So yeah, just clean, and I find the more I clean stuff, it really helps me with disassembly, because then you're not having to deal with dirty shit that often hides stuff. And ideally, when you're at the disassembly stage, like you're trying to clean everything up, you don't want crud falling off things and then falling into places that you might not spot that it's been there. So cleanliness is the key with car stuff in general. Anything at all that you're pulling apart, just clean it. And it's so much more of a pleasure to deal with then. Like, it just makes the process so much easier. Anyway, I'll stop rambling and I'll start with this. So, there's a staked area here. So I'll grab a camera and I'll just show you that. So this is what they're referring to here, guys. This little divot there will stop you removing this. It's one of the first things that you have to remove, other than like the pinion assembly. So you can see you can get this out part of the way, but then the threads start to hit that staked area. So they've just hit that with a punch. It's called staking. They've just smacked it in there. So to get rid of staked metal, we have to drill that out. So I am going to grab a drill and I'm going to drill that out. And once that's drilled out, it should allow me to get this all the way off. And then we can start pulling the pinion apart and things and start sliding all of the internals out of this thing and having a look at the way everything is. And that's the result there, guys. So you can see where we've drilled through. That's where the drill bits landed on the aluminium there. Right, so before I unscrew that, I think we might attack the pinion end. Where do I start? Alright, well, I guess external stuff. We'll get rid of these banjo bolts and washers. You can see I've already replaced one of the banjo setups here with an AN fitting. That's part of my power steering cooler setup that I'm running on the car. You guys will see that when the car sort of gets put together, and I have shown that previously in some earlier videos when I was setting this all up. Alright, so I might take this solenoid valve off now, guys. There's just 3 socket head bolts there. As far as I can tell, there's nothing that protrudes from it. It's just a valve. You can see here on the drawing up here, it just looks like it's flat with some O-rings that seal against the body of the pinion bizzo. So we'll get those off and we'll put that to one side. Nailed it. Yep, just as it looks. So you got an O-ring there. You know, they both have a crevice that they sit in down here. Get them out. So that's that, guys. So you can see there's nothing scary there. Flat, no gaskets, 2 holes, 2 O-rings. I know they're in the kit. I remember seeing a couple of O-rings. So we're looking pretty good. Alright, we can just throw that to one side now. So the next thing we want to do is remove this top part of the pinion. So it looks like we've got 1, 2, 3 of these, what are they? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 pointed bolt things. 8mm socket. 8mm socket, guys. Yep. Alrighty. There we go. 1, 2. Number 3. Refer back to our diagram. Now that's a piece here that we're about to take off. Got these bolts out. So we've got our pinion assembly. There's all sorts of components in this, but it looks like we can slide the housing off, leave the pinion sitting in place. We have a whole heap of pinion seal rings on here, but it looks like we should be able to just work that off the top and then have a look at what we're left with. Alright, so that moved off pretty easily. In here, nada. But we do have a bearing and seal in the top here. Alright, so I don't know how that comes out. We'll look into that later. It looks like it comes out from the inside, but it looks like it has been staked, as you can see from the marks around the edges of that. So we may struggle a bit getting that out. Anyway, it's definitely something that needs to be done. That seal is hard as a rock. Oh yeah, it is. It's hard as a friggin' rock. I guess it's been, you know, in the engine bay, been quite close to the exhaust. It's no wonder that that'll be sort of quite cooked. Alright, so we can put that to one side. So these pinion seals that they show here in the factory service manual. So that's these guys here. You can see we've got this these kind of grooves around here. And each one of these has one of these pinion seals that floats on it. So we've got to get those off. I'll just show them to you before I go getting them off. I'll probably just use this pick. I assume they're rubber. So we'll get all those off before we move on to our next step. Don't know if they're meant to be this hard, but they are very hard. Let's have a look. You have pinion seals? Maybe not. Alright, can't see them in my stuff, so we may have hit a snag already, guys. I'll just go and check and make sure they're still available. Alright, I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I'm back after doing a little bit of research, and this is what I've found out, guys. So these pinion sealing rings, these 6 guys that are on your pinion here, they are still available from Nissan. From what I understand, they show up as being available. However, often when I order stuff, once it's been ordered, it then comes up as being not available, so I don't know. I'm going to attempt to order a set of these. They say that they're Teflon, I guess, which probably explains why they're hard, and I have no idea really how much they wear. Maybe they're not something that ever seems to be problematic, which is why none of the main suppliers who sell rebuild kits for the steering racks like Z1 or you know, Concept Z or any of those guys, their kits are basically only the same sort of stuff that I've got here, bar a few bits and pieces. I don't think they have these copper washers in them, but basically it's just the exact same stuff that I've got here. I don't know how much of an issue this is. I'm going to order a set, or see if I can order a set and replace them anyway, just because, you know, it's just another part of the rack. I'm at this point with it now. They're not that expensive. I think they're about maybe $6 each or something, which is kind of expensive for something like this. So about $40 I think for a set of them. But at this stage, I don't know, I'm in two minds. And the pinion housing, here's another thing, guys. You cannot buy this seal and bearing individually from Nissan. They want to sell you the whole housing. So if you want to replace that seal or bearing, you're kind of screwed, because that's their way of doing it. And I think this housing is like $150, $180 or something, just to get a new seal and a new bearing. Now, I can't imagine anything ever really goes wrong with a bearing, because it's just, you know, the shaft that's turning in there. And it's a pretty decent roller bearing in there. But I don't know about the seal. The seal doesn't look great. And that's a bit of a worry. And realistically, a seal's just a seal. Like, you know, if I can get the seal and the bearing out, I guarantee I can find replacements for it. And I'm sure the reason they've made it like this is because of how they've assembled it. So as I say, they've staked the bearing so it's not removable, but it really wouldn't be that hard to get in there, grind a little bit off those stake marks, and then bang that out with a socket or something, get the numbers off it, and just replace it. I can get the numbers off the bearing from here, I can read them. It's an NTN, something or other, something or other. I could read that quite easily with my magnifier. And the seal, really, is just a matter of measuring it. But like I say, this seal, maybe it's something that doesn't leak, because no one sells replacement parts for this either. There are none of the aftermarket suppliers sell that seal and that bearing. So I can either risk it and just put the whole lot together, don't worry about these things, don't worry about that, just put it together. It may not have leaked anyway. As I say, it was very hard to know with this thing, just because of the amount of stuff that was leaking in this area. Everything was just covered in oil. It was impossible to see what it was particularly, which is why you should try and keep things pretty clean in your engine bay. So that's the dilemma I have, guys. We'll see. While I was at it, I jumped onto YouTube and had a bit of a look to see if I could find any decent videos of anyone else doing this sort of stuff, and possibly glean a bit of information about these pinion seals and about this bearing and everything, but no one mentioned anything about them. I did, however, pick up a couple of errors in some other people's videos. One of them, the guy was mucking around. He marked the top of the pinion shaft and the body before he disassembled it. You don't need to do that. That's only so that if you want to put the rack back in the car and make sure it's centered, it kind of helps you when you reconnect the universal joint on the bottom. It's not actually for matching the location of the pinion shaft to the rack. They're irrelevant. You can put that back in anywhere. Realistically, what you should do is, after the rack's rebuilt, center the rack following the instructions in the FSM, and then possibly mark the pinion on the housing then, just so that you know the rack's centered when you're putting it back in the car and connecting your universal joint up. It really doesn't matter that much. Well, it matters that it's centered, but it's really just so that your steering wheel angle and everything is correct, so you don't have a cock steering wheel and stuff like that. That's really all that is about. So you don't need to do that. Other than that, yeah, unfortunately, the videos I watched weren't very much help. Hopefully I can do a bit better for you guys and give you something that's a bit more straightforward to follow. Anyhow, we can leave this stuff. I don't have to deal with that now, and I don't have to deal with that now, and I can carry on with the disassembly of all of this. So the next thing that I might do is actually remove this pinion shaft, and it should just pull out from what I understand. So let's give that a go. There we go. Look at that, guys. Easy as that. Just be a bit careful because it actually turns as it pulls out. You can see it has grease on it, so it will need to be greased on reassembly. All in there. Okay, so that you can't buy this bearing either. That's considered to be part of the shaft as well. And you can see here we have a shim on the underside of the bearing, or that goes in there. You can do it on assembly. You would probably have to put it in here, but you can see there's a very thin shim here. Be really careful with that so you don't damage it, because apparently those shims are no longer available. It does mention in the factory service manual to replace that shim if you're rebuilding the rack, but as I say, can't really do that if it's not available, and it should still be shimmed the same. So just be careful with it, because it is very thin, quite easy to damage it. Yeah, so it looks pretty good. I'll clean it up and have a look at it, but it looks pretty good. There doesn't seem to be any major marks on it anywhere or anything. Down in here, obviously this is our seal for the outside. We've guy there. What have we got in here? Okay, so then we've got a seal in there. I'll just clean that up so you can get a better look at it. There you go, that shows the orientation of the seal for reassembly. You can see the open side with the spring is facing this way, facing up. So when you put the new seal, which is one of the guys in amongst the parts that I have over here, when you put that in, that is the way it has to go. Alright, so we'll just pop this out with a seal remover. Get yourself a seal remover, guys, if you don't have one. Cheap, simple tool, invaluable to use. If you're doing something like this, you'll just be friggin' tearing your hair out if you don't have one. It just makes getting seals out of stuff real easy. Just like that, guys, no dicking around. There's our seal. Out! Seal be gone. And that's what you have in there, guys. So you can see your rack here. That's going to be sliding through in there. And then down in the bottom, that's just where the bottom of the pinion sits. There's probably a bearing in there maybe. And it's just a greased area, so obviously it doesn't see probably a lot of transmission fluid in there. It just mainly relies on the grease, which kind of makes sense. The transmission fluid stays between this top seal and the top of the pinion. That's where the kind of mechanism is, and that then kind of squirts transmission fluid into this body, pushes this piston backwards and forwards. Again, that returns back into that body kind of thing. That's why you have seals on either side of this shaft and this piston in the center for in here, just to sort of keep all the sort of fluid contained. And yeah, so I think that's what the go is with that. So this adjuster on the side here, we'll get that out next. And how that works is that just applies spring-loaded pressure onto the side of the shaft, like in this direction. So it's just pushing the shaft in here against the pinion, and it really just governs how tight the mesh is between the pinion and the rack. Alright, let's get that out, eh? So to get this off, we have to loosen the lock nut, and the lock nut is the big hex nut on the outside. Now that is a 38mm. Now my biggest sockets and spanners finish at 36. So it's a little bit hard for me to get off with a socket or a spanner. So I'm going to have to break out the big bloke. Get it with that. Alrighty. There we go. Why you need lots of tools, guys. What else would I have done? I could have used a pair of multi grips on it maybe, but that would have risked sort of buggering that up. As you can see, it's a big thing, but it's fairly fragile. There's not a lot to it. You burr that over and make a mess out of it. You know, no good will come of that. This, on the other hand, is just a 12mm, so we can just use a 12mm socket on a ratchet, and we'll get that out and we'll have a look at the assembly as we pull it out. Oh, quickly, before I go any further with this, guys, I'm going to put a couple of little tiny punch marks on this before I remove it, just so it helps me with reassembly. There is a method in the factory service manual to get the correct tension on this adjuster, because as I say, all it's doing is putting pressure against the rack shaft against the pinion to give you the right amount of tension in your steering feel, so it's tight but it's not binding up. So I'm just going to use a little fine punch. This is an old cordless drill bit, probably a Phillips head. I reckon I've snapped it at some point. I snap a few of them here and there, you know, doing stuff. I generally keep them and regrind them into different things. This is one that I've just ground up into a scriber. I also use them to make little fine punch marks and things like that, because they are quite hard steel. Rather than throw them out, it's good to find a use for things like this if you can. Perfect rather than a big punch, you know, something more like this that I use for just general general punch marks on things that are a bit big and cumbersome for something as fine a detail as you want to be working with this. And that's what that looks like, guys. Just two little tiny dots that line up. As I say, it's not something from the factory service manual, it's just something from my brain. Take it or leave it, do as you please, but that's what I'm doing. Alright, let's get it out. So I'll make a note. Fortunately, I've got the video here to do it for me. I'll make a note of how many turns it takes to get this thing out. And we'll start from a good reference point. I'll start in line with the steering rack here. Get my ratchet so that it's locked on in line in that position, and then we'll start undoing it. I'll just shift along a little bit. So that's half a turn, one full turn, turn and a quarter, turn and a half, turn and 3/4, 2 turns. And I am just pulling up slightly on this so I know as soon as it releases. 2 1/4. 6 1/2. 6 3/4. 7. 7 1/4. Oh, see that? Just over 7 1/4, that much. I'll just bring the camera across the front here. So, that much past 7 1/4, and it disengaged. So when I start to thread this on, I'll put it in that position, and it should start to engage straight away. If the threads don't lock in on that spot, I know I'm not right on it, but that's where it is. And if I can just get the socket off without moving it, you can see that my punch mark is in this position here. Oh geez, I'm a bit shaky. Might need a drink. It's in that position there, so when I start it, we'll start it there. We'll put our ratchet in that spot, and that's what we'll be doing. So it gives us a good idea where to start from. And be fairly confident that we're going to end up somewhere near the right spot. Right, so that's that guy. We'll lay these out in order too as we get them off. It's our spring packed with grease. And we have like this flat disc, a big lump of grease on it, and that's used to put even pressure against this next piece that we're about to pull out. And actually next we have these two guys. There should be 2 washers here. So we've got like a thicker flat washer that was on the bottom of the hole, and then we have this sort of convex shaped guy on top of it, and you can see sort of the shape of that. So the rounded side goes up, so the domed face goes upwards like that. So the domed face is what sits against your adjusting nut when you push it down on there, and that adds a little bit of kind of springiness between the two. So that's how that works, guys. So it's adjusting nut, thin dome face washer with the dome facing up towards the adjusting nut, and then the thick washer underneath it. And then we've got this guy. So you can see that's the way it came out, like so. Now I don't know if that has an up or a down. It does look fairly consistent. I'd say it probably doesn't matter which way up or down this thing goes. It looks like it sits dead center of the shaft, but I will put a little mark on it anyway, just for reassembly purposes. So I will just I'll just scratch a little T in there, a T for Trevor, or in this case, a T for top. So, little T won't affect anything, just means that when I'm reassembling, I'll just put it in with the T facing the top as it is in here on the bench, like so. And you know, at least then it just goes back the way that it came. It doesn't appear that it's something that would have worn in to a particular sort of shape or anything like that. So as I say, it is probably irrelevant, so I wouldn't stress too much about it. But you know, it always helps if you put everything back the way it came out. All right, what's next? So the time has come to get this end cover off the rack housing. So let's go back to this and have a bit of a look where I drilled out the stake mark, and I'll show you what I've done to that in order to be able to get this cap off. So I have had to open up this drilled area here, because what you often find when something's been staked like this, you've got the mark where it's been staked, but it's also indented the metal in around it. So I started trying to undo this, and what you'll find is it'll either be really, really tight or it'll start to shed metal off the threads as soon as the threads engage on the part that was staked. Now I had both of those situations with this. It was really, really super tight, and as the threads, which you can see start to come up now, as they started to engage in the staked area, it started to peel the threads off. So it started to shed a lot of aluminium, and that was happening in both directions. So if you try to loosen it, it was very tight. It would start to make little spirals of aluminium in that direction, and then you'd go to put it back in, and it would start to make little spirals in aluminium on that direction. So obviously this is a very fine thread. You don't have a lot of meat to play with something like this, so you do not want that to be the case, because you can very quickly damage the thread and take a lot of it off and like render this piece here pretty much useless. So what I've done is I've opened this up with a Dremel. So I've just been using you know, a trusty Dremel here with a like a small, God, it just doesn't like the focus, does it? With a small rotary burr on the end, and I've just gotten into where that hole is, and I've just started opening it up and opening it up and opening it up until I could stop it shedding aluminium, which that's the result. It took a fair bit, but as you can see, I can actually undo this by hand now. So I've completely removed the resistance that was going against this thread, and it no longer sheds aluminium on the way in or the way out, okay, which is what you want. You don't want that to be too messy. Now it's a bit daggy looking what I've done there, but don't worry yourselves too much about that, because it is inconsequential. As you can see, when it's threaded in, the threads don't start till right on or after that section there that I've attacked with the die grinder. So obviously it's not really doing anything you know. Now there's a seal that sits behind here, so this doesn't, you know, this can't leak anyway, so there's no oil flow past that seal in that direction, so it's not like it leaks up through the threads or anything. But that's the kind of thing you have to do, guys. And again, the factory service manual doesn't detail stuff like that. It just basically says to drill out the stake hole. So if you drill out the stake mark and then, you know, you just go, well, that's what it said to do, and then you just go at this with a big shifter or a big pair of multis and just use brute force to get this out, there's a good chance that you're going to very, very badly impact on these threads. So that's where I find actual instructions like this to be a bit of a benefit, because you can see the difference. You know, that's just, you know, how you would expect it to be. No damages occurring to the threads. It's nice and easy to do. You're not having to wind it on with a big shifter. And the only reason that would be the case is if this area is still pushing hard against the thread. It may not be cutting the thread, but it usually would. You know, that's the only reason you would have to be forcing that with something like a big shifter. So anyway, as you can see, that's now out. Come on, baby. Okay, that's now out. That's what it looks like. The threads are all very good. You can see that mark there. That's where I initially drilled the stake mark. So we're all good. So the next thing we've got to do is get the rack out of the housing. It comes out that way, and as it comes out, it takes the seal with it. So the seal sits just behind this connection here. It's right very close to the end of the housing here. So what we'll do is we will push or drive the rack out, and it will bring the seal with it. And how I'm going to achieve that is just with a socket extension bar. I'm just going to push that in the end here. All right, that's small enough so that it won't damage the thread that's in the end there for your inner tie rod to screw into. As I say, small enough not to damage it. And we should be able to push or drive this out. I'll probably just drive it. I've got it held pretty well in the vise here. Fortunately, I've got a vise that's got a different jaw on the other end. It's got a pipe jaw on the other end, so it's actually quite good for holding unique shapes like this. Under no circumstances put this section of the rack body into the vise, because this is you know, this has to be perfectly concentric on the inside for the piston to slide in and out of. And if you squeeze this and distort it at all, basically throw your rack away. I have seen people on YouTube videos that I've recently watched, as I mentioned, with the rack clamped in this position. Mate, it's just, don't do it. It's the worst thing you can possibly do. You just have to work something else out, guys. That's all there is to it. You could quite easily sit this on the ground or sit it on something and drive this out, something with a hole in it, you know, and drive it out. Like, there's always ways. Do not clamp this body. All right. Let's give this a bit of a crack. Alright, so that's out now, guys. As you saw, not a whole heap of force required to get that out, so don't go all Brutus on it and beat the crap out of your housing. It should come out fairly easily, just like that. Alright, let's have a bit of a look at it. And here it is, the rack. So that's the seal that we pushed out there, guys. That obviously, so there's another seal in the housing that sits on this end, and that's your piston. Okay, so how your rack works, those two holes in the housing, one here and one here, they just apply hydraulic pressure on either side of this piston to move the rack left and right. These guys here, so you got that one there, and you got this other one over here, so that sits in the middle, and hydraulic pressure is applied on either side of that, which then runs back to your pinion, and that's how your whole hydraulic power rack and pinion works. So yeah, we'll just take that seal off, put it in our pile of used bits, So this is basically your piston ring. So this is this Teflon ring here. And that's it there. That's how it comes to you from Nissan. So it's a piston seal set. So that's your Teflon kind of piston ring. And then there's an O-ring. Now that O-ring isn't part of it. That's just sort of loose. But that's how it actually sits on this unit here. So when you remove that Teflon piston ring, that O-ring actually sits underneath it. So to remove this, you can basically just cut it or prise it off and get it out. It's kind of firm, so you will kind of struggle with getting it out without doing something with it. But okay, I might do that. I might take it out for you. So we'll just cut that. Like so. That's pretty much it. And we can remove it. There it is, guys. And as I say, then you've got your O-ring underneath it, which is kind of like an oil control ring. So that and that is that and that. That's all there is to that. So now we have to remove the other seal, which is sitting about here, and a bush. There's like a heavy metal bush. So the seal, obviously, same as this guy here, it was sitting here. So there's obviously another one just about here. So to get that out, we refer back to the factory service manual. So our factory service manual states to remove the center bushing and rack oil seal, use a tape wrapped socket and extension bar. Do not scratch the inner surface of the pinion housing. Now in the little diagram here, I've got a big shadow coming across here. Maybe I can fix that. It says to use a 29mm socket. Okay, 29mm socket on an extension bar. Now what they mean by that isn't a socket that's used to remove 29mm bolts. They mean a socket with a 29mm outer diameter. So let's have a bit of a look at that. So I have 3 sockets here, guys. They've all got one wrap of electrical tape on them. So they take that, which will obviously take up minimal space. There is a very tiny overlap on the electrical tape, but not a hell of a lot. So our first one, with tape, measures 28.67, and it does not fit in. Second one, with tape, measures 28.28. It does not fit in. Third one, it measures 28.04. It fits in. So they're incorrect with their 29mm and then using tape, because these sockets did not start off as 29. I think the biggest one was 28.7 or 28.6. And as you can see, even with tape, it's still not 29. It's 28.7 basically when it's taped. So it was probably 28.4 or something. So just be careful with that, guys. And the reason is that you'll jam your friggin' socket in there if you try to use a 29mm socket with some tape in it. You might get it in a little ways, but if you start hammering it, you're just going to ruin everything. So just do everything with a little bit of an eye on caution to things, guys, because this is what I was talking about earlier on with things like the factory service manual, it's great to be able to read the information there, but you've got to have a bit of background knowledge yourself to be able to properly interpret these things. And as I mentioned, take everything with a grain of salt, because if you follow that to a T, you will fuck up your steering rack. So I think that's I think it's a 13/16 socket or something with tape on it. As I say, 28.03, and it just fits. It's a snug fit, but I can get it through. So we're going to use that guy. I'm going to drive out the seal and the bush from the rack housing. Extension bar, whack her on. There's old grease inside here, so it doesn't really need any lube. You can see, like, I've got to get it dead straight or it won't go through. And then it'll rest against the bush, which is resting against the seal. So we'll keep this nice and centered. Start driving her out. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to move it, guys. Probably see it pop out the end there. As I say, we're keeping this nice and centered in here. We don't want the bar to rest down on the pinion housing here, because it will probably mark it. Again, even though things do require force, don't go at it like a bull at a gate. Like, you've just got to be careful with things. Alright, how far we got to go? Alright, we're getting there. I'll just throw another extension on there. And this should get us out. There it is, guys. Now carefully withdraw your shaft. I'm always very careful when I withdraw my shaft, and it's always a good idea to give your shaft a good wipe down, because often when you pull your shaft out, it could be carrying contaminants with it. And that's what it looks like up close, guys. That's your bush, and that is your seal. You'll notice these seals, they're a heavy duty hydraulic seal. They have a Teflon ring inside them in there, as well as the spring on the back. That is what you need for a seal with this kind of requirement. So our other one, it's the same. It has the same Teflon ring on the inside, and these always go with the spring facing the hydraulic pressure. So that's the way it kind of goes, like that. So yeah, that one faces the hydraulic pressure that way, that one faces the hydraulic pressure that way, and that's what you've got. And as you can see, your replacement seal kit, that's exactly what's in there. You got that spacer, a new bush I mean, and you got the two new seals, again with the Teflon rings in them. So yes, guys, we are now completely disassembled. And you know what that means? Yes, it's the end of the video. Well, this part of it anyway, guys. Once I chase up the sealing rings and the seal around that pinion cover, whether or not that's a goer, I'll then embark on the reassembly video, which will be part 2 to this one. So anyway, guys, I hope you've gained some useful information from this video. I know there isn't a lot of information available on rebuilding the Z32's power steering racks, and it is the same rack whether you're doing like a TT rack or an NA rack. Obviously, if this is a right hand drive rack, if you're doing a left hand drive rack, it's the same rack but just mirror reverse. I don't think I've missed anything. I hope I've shed a bit of light on all those little grey areas and kind of demystified it a lot for you guys, so that you can see that it is actually something that's completely doable for your average person at home in their workshop. There are particular areas that you obviously have to pay attention to, But the main thing I hope I've imparted onto you guys is the fact that it is doable, and just take your time. Don't go at things like a bull at a gate, and just try to be generally a bit smart about how you work, more so than you know, being a bit more sort of physically aggressive about how you do things. And if you follow that methodology, you'll do really well with car parts in general. So anyway, guys, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Always a bloody pleasure to have you here. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, as it does help me with the algorithm. And as always, guys, I'll bloody well see you on the next one. Cheers.